I think most people don't know your job exists, or maybe they don't think about your job existing when they watch stop motion animation. So how does one become a stop motion animation costume designer?
That's an interesting question. I was just reading something earlier about a story I told a while ago about how I got into it, and I was just telling these guys how I got into it a little bit. I studied sculpture at art school. I went to St. Martin's, and clearly there's a very famous fashion course there as well, and everyone kind of mingled together, and it was a much smaller school when I initially went there than where it is now. So I could work collaboratively with different people. So I did a lot of installation work. I worked with fabrics and I worked with upholstery. I made sculpture, but I also made steel armatures or wooden armatures, and I tried to make them animatable. I failed, but I had that idea in mind. And I also made costume pieces for myself and worked within the environments. Mm-hmm. So being in Soho in the middle of London, a lot of film companies approached me about doing film work or theatre work. It was mainly just props and the odd costume piece or a wig or things that were unusual that utilised different materials like silicons and steel or wood or just different properties. And they were looking for something different, or something that looked like what it wasn't, like changing materials. So I got quite interested in that. Mm-hmm. And when I left college, I had my own workspace, and it kind of rolled into this sequence where I just had one job after another, and they were all quite unusual and used materials in a different way. And a lot of animation companies started approaching me, and I didn't really even know at that time that that was a medium I could work in. It was a very happy accident. I really enjoyed the scale. I enjoyed that level of detail and being able to invest more and more in it in a very tiny space, and then seeing it very big and seeing how those things looked when they the size was blown up on a theatre screen. Just gave me a forum where I could utilize all the things that I really enjoyed. And I worked more and more in animation. So I worked doing the wigs and the body shapes and soldering the armatures and working out the logistics of how costume would move with an armature when there isn't a person in it to propel that costume around. How do you do that? So I just used all the knowledge that I'd learned over time doing sculpture and working in different mediums to invest that in those characters. And when Leica started, Travis Knight set up Leica. I was very excited because all the projects I'd done have been much smaller and shorter. The end is always in sight and you're always looking for something else, but this was an opportunity to really almost see the future, like work bigger and take things a lot further than I've been able to with the budget restraints and time limits of other productions I'd worked on. So I've been at Leica since the beginning of Coraline. I've worked on all their movies, and previously to that I'd worked with Tim Burton on Corpse Bride and worked with Wes Anderson on Fantastic Mr. Fox, and previous to that I'd worked on a lot of TV shows and productions in England as well. So coming to Leica and seeing that there was going to be like a studio devoted to that medium was pretty exciting, and I really wanted to be part of it.
So what is the actual process when you're making a stop motion animation film? Like I'm assuming that you brought one of the puppets tonight. But
I did. It's just down there. Yeah. I felt silly
Everyone
holding
can
it
come
up
up later
here,
and look at it later.
So that's a fully functioning puppet there.
So I'm assuming they have to create that first. But then when do you start? Do you read the script or talk to like Chris Butler, director in this case? The ideas?
I mean, so the costume and the bodies are considered at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the body isn't built first and then you dress it. It's a more of a, it grows in figures.
I can hold it.
Okay. Thank you. It steps forward incrementally at the same time. So we might start drawing out the body shape and thinking about what clothes they're going to wear. And Chris really wanted really elongated body shapes and how we were going to make those animatable. These look like figures, but they're their proportions are very, very different. Like their elbows and shoulders and wrists are in completely different places. Yes, that's an articulated puppet there. So they need to be able to touch their heads, and their heads are huge compared to their body scale. And their hands have to not look weird against their faces, and their knees have to be in a certain place, and their hips have to be set in a certain place to be able to just move freely in the way that we need to animate them. Remind me of your question again. I've wobbled.
Oh,
off.
just
Well,
no, you're on the right track. Just what's the entire the process?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So you can see with her waist how tiny that is. If I was dressing a full-size human, we would never ever be able to do that to a human being. But we can create her body underneath that to support the shape. So we wanted her in a swanbill corset, which is commonly called an S-bend corset, which is like one step on from a Victorian crinoline shape. And she was very fashion forward, Adelina. She was quite vain. And even though this is a morning dress, it's fuchsia pink because at the turn of the century, all the dyes were changing. And we could actually create her body shape exactly how we wanted it, as we were able to do with the Link Susan character as well, and Lionel, who's extremely elongated and has very wide set hips and extremely long legs. And Chris also wanted them to represent the different areas that they were from. So Lionel being from London, where everything was really elongated and tall and particular colour tones. And as they start travelling, they come across Adelina, and she's in a very Art Deco, brightly coloured environment, and more kind of rounded, voluptuous shapes and colours. And then as we move towards Shangri-La at the end of the film, it's like stark and pointy, kind of
it's like white,
brutal looking, and very reflective and hard materials. So their body shapes also represent that flow as well, along with the texture and the colours.
So I'm assuming you make all of their clothes from scratch, or
we do, yes.
Yeah, okay.
We initially, I think when we started at Leica on Coraline, we were still buying off the shelf shop bought fabrics because we were able to, and we were able to customize them to a certain degree. But as our animation techniques evolved at the company, we realized we could just get much more if we were really self-sufficient, and we could really make these fabrics ourselves. So we just started to look at the properties and the techniques that we'd learnt that worked for us in this scale, and started to produce our own fabrics that had animatable qualities built into them. So that movement, that follow-through of a costume that you get for free in a human being, we could start building those in. So incrementally, we built different things into them. And this has got quite a elaborate thing underneath. It's going to be very hard to see here. But it's her hip is actually on a swivel joint, so you can get that swish of the dress, and the dress bounces, and there's a lining in there that it's laser cut weighted lining, so it gives a gravity that we're also not able to get in that scale. And all of this is built in at the design stage. So even where the seams go on the costume, that we create a principle or a language for that throughout each movie we do as well, so that we need to be able to access these puppets at all times to tension the armature. There's like 30 animators that might use these, and each movement has to be consistent with the character profile. So they all like them tensioned in a completely different way. So at the outset of every shot, all their seams are open. They look shocking. It upsets me when I see them like that. I like to see them like this. But their seams are open, there's rigs poking out of them, and they quite often, they don't support themselves and just walk across a set. Each set has just got a screw hole, and there's a threaded foot. So they're tied down for each frame. There's 24 frames a second. So we have sets full of holes and costumes that are wrecked. And those get comped out, along with some of the VFX that we use to sometimes retime things or do set extensions.
How many copies of each outfit do you make?
It can vary. I mean, with Lionel, there was like over 40 test costumes to start with, just to find what it's actually going to look like and how it moves and the colour and performance. And for the duplication process as well, you need to believe that Lionel is the same character wearing the same suit throughout the movie, but there isn't. There's quite a lot of him. And we have to find a duplication process in this tiny scale. This folder is like Bibles this thick of all the tiniest little details so that each costume looks exactly the same, like each of these daisies on her dress, which I hand drew, and then we machine stitched them into a particular fabric that makes it look flush with the surface. So we changed the weights of the thread, the colours, to make it look more embedded. We can change the stitch count to remove the stitches apart without losing the design. So there's many different samples of this fabric to try and get that appearance.
Mm-hmm. How long does one completed outfit take? Like, how long did this take?
For lead characters, it can take like sometimes like, I want to say like between 4 to 6 months to create them. And when we're doing duplicates, it's less. But we have a team of about somewhere between 17 and 25 costumers alone in the puppet department that just work on that.
Wow. So when something happens to their clothes on screen, like there's a scene where Link like splits his pants.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to make that yourself?
We do, but that's actually made a much bigger scale. So that's like that actual shot. His pants are bigger than me. They're like this. It's like 400 or 500 times the size. Because if you blew something up like that to the size of the screen, you would see every tiny little thing. It would look awful. So to maintain that suspended belief that it's still the same character, we build things to a bigger scale. And it's off-rigged, so there's winders that incrementally pull the threads apart of the pants, even though it might just be a few seconds in the film. There's giant winders that when people come on tours of the studio, they love to play with that.
So which one was the hardest one to make?
It's always the lead character, because everyone's investment hangs on that lead character and getting that character right, like getting the suit fabric right. And, Chris's expectations. He was very much invested on what Lionel's suit looked like. He had a very favourite waistcoat that he wanted Lionel's waistcoat to be like. And we went through various different fabrics and different patterns for that suit before we landed on that one that fitted the concept of the movie and the concept of what London would be like, very tight pinched squares. We started off with him in like a herringbone pattern, but he looked too country gent rather than city gent. We couldn't make that work. What did you say again?
Oh, yeah, the hardest one to make. So that one, yeah.
Yeah, it is, because they just, everyone's expectations hangs on that, and it sets the formula really for the rest of the costumes. Like each concept that comes into that really plays out amongst all the other characters. So they're all kind of different versions of that. Right. So getting the body shape right and the fit of the costume, the elongation in him, for example, and his hair and his face structure, his gestures, that he's able to make the gestures and movements that we want in that costume as well. Everything relies on that. We do live action videos actually of quite often people in the studio or the animators just to follow the movements, to follow that action of an actual human doing it.
So you could see like the flow of the clothes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just to really make sure we're going in the right direction with it.
So what are you working on now? Was there another one of these in the works?
I've been working on the next one since the end of 2014.
Wow.
So there would already be a script at that point, which has already been through its own stages. And then I would start reading the script and start pulling out all the different parts of each character and the director's expectation of what those characters are, what their narrative arc is, what emotional journey they take, what colours he's attaching to them, what textural environment they might be in, what era, the economic structure, everything that plays into it. So I start moving forward that whilst this film this was kind of completed. Ending down.
So they're always like concurrent?
They kind of overlap for me because I work at the outset of